Greetings, ladies and mentalgets, and welcome to this latest episode of Tales from Outer Space, where I take a space-related story from around the internet and read it out loud for your enjoyment. All the relevant links are down below. Please don't forget to do the usual YouTube gumph, because if you don't, the nanite swarms will steal your other sock. But more importantly, as always, I hope that you enjoy. I just want to give a quick thanks to the Tier 5 channel members and patrons. Bob the Dragon, Datamagnet, Sergeant Puma, Cat Crab Lobster, and Duck Machine. Thank you very much for the support. It is much appreciated. Story number 1. The Humans of Old, written by Archangel 98. It had been nearly 200,000 standard galactic years since the event that would later come to be known as the last Great Galactic War had taken place. It was a full-scale military conflict between nearly every sentient race in the galaxy, with only a handful of planets remaining neutral throughout its entirety. It raged for 17 standard galactic years, or SGYs for short. Alliances were formed, broken, remade with other races, and broken again. Never before in the known history of our galaxy had such a conflict taken place. Many warrior races had eagerly joined in on the conflict, and most of them were either destroyed completely in the first few years or were so thoroughly crushed in combat that they denounced their warrior ways in shame. Entire worlds were burnt. Races were reduced so greatly in number that they effectively had to restart their society. And with every battle, the need for better weapons grew. By the end of the war, so few people remained that no one was quite sure how it started in the first place. No one except the humans. Humans were the only warrior race to not only avoid complete ruin, but had actually managed to thrive in the conflicts. None of the rest of the species of the galaxy were surprised. Humans were perhaps the most feared race ever known, not due to cruelty or barbarism, but from their insurmountable physical abilities and ingenuity. However, with each passing day, the war raged on. The humans grew more and more ferocious. With each battle, their tactics and technology improved. Their warriors became more ruthless and efficient, and their feats more terrifying. Humanity had managed to defeat 19 of the 23 races that had allied against them within the final 2 years of the war. While there are no species that still exist with lifespans long enough to remember the final days of the conflict, there are still countless hollow recordings from those battles. As part of a higher education course, I was required to watch some of those videos from those conflicts. I still have nightmares. Although, for every evil that occurred during the war, humanity hadn't truly lost its central beliefs. With the realization of what was to come should the war continue, humanity let loose its dogs of war and beat every single one of its enemies into submission, saving what remained of the galaxy. They fought with every scrap and trick that they could muster. They committed atrocities that no sane species would have ever dreamed of doing. They created weapons of war so advanced that they began to think for themselves. They called these creations the Olympians. They were each created to complete different tasks, and as a result, they took on many different forms. Some were designed for combat, and thus were given weapons so advanced that even hundreds of thousands of years later, we still don't fully understand how they worked. Some were meant for espionage or rebuilding projects after the battles were over. They were created dozens of these Olympians and released them into the galaxy. 5 days later, every enemy and ally of humanity surrendered completely and gave in to the humans and Olympians' demands. The humans ordered their creations to disarm the different races of any weapons too dangerous to be allowed to exist. Black hole bombs, star siphons, biogenic disintegrators, etc. And then the humans did something that no other race expected the conquerors of the galaxy to do. They turned over all of their weapons to the Olympians as well. We had assumed that the humans were going to become the new lords of our worlds, but instead they joined us in our feebleness. They had realized that the war had been allowed to continue, then all life in the galaxy would be destroyed. So they created these protections to ensure that nothing like that war ever occurred again. Afterwards, the Olympians escorted what remained of each species to a habitable world for them to rebuild. All except the humans. They all boarded what remained of the ships and flew into the stars. 180,000 SGYs passed, and not one species had managed to find any trace of human technology. It was as if they never existed. Until one day, a small scouting vessel was scanning a world for potential colonization. It was deemed unsuitable, as it was later discovered to be a Class 5 death world. To the shock of many species, it was later discovered to be inhabited. We attempted to initiate first contact with the race, but later realized they hadn't yet developed the necessary level of technology to receive our signals. A small team was sent to the surface and brought back a specimen for study, then released it back to its home. To the collective shock, horror, and fascination, the creature the team brought back aboard was in fact a human. Although it seemed different than the humans of old somehow. It was taller, had a shorter lifespan, and had many other differences. Some suggested that perhaps it was a coincidence, that perhaps this species simply closely resembled the humans. A genetic scan was performed, and the results were a match for humanity. Somehow, and for some unknown reason, they had been altered on a genetic level, and all of the technology that was once envied by the rest of the galaxy was nowhere to be found. A scan of the planet and its moon was performed. At the center of the moon, the scan showed that what remained of the human space fleet had been stored and preserved. Not only their fleet, but also several of the Olympians were inside the moon as well. More scans were conducted, and several more ships and Olympians were found buried under the mountains of rock and earth. The humans had also left something else, a single, small beacon on the surface of the dark side of the moon. We scanned it, and a message was downloaded onto our servers. The message was pulled up and began to play. A human wearing a warrior's uniform stood in the center of the screen and began to speak. "Hello! If you are seeing this message, then you have found what remains of humanity. After the events of the Galactic War, humanity decided that we had grown too powerful, too cruel. We had endeavored to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. We plan to alter our genetics to better suit this new environment that we have chosen to be our prison. For we have committed many vile crimes. Our technology is stored safely away and protected by our finest and most devastating creations. We ask that if any sufficiently advanced species finds us out here on the fringes of known space, that you leave us to our isolation, our confinement. If one day our species ever takes to the stars again, tell them what happened. Tell them our story, their story. Including in this message is the coordinates of the original homeworld of humanity, Olympus Prime. Please give them this recording and these maps so that they can finally find their way home." End of story. Story number 2. The Galactic Cooking Competition, written by lainmelle. Ixel rushed home from their work at the Zaniana Fulcrum testing facility. They knew that they only had 5 quid until the Galactic Cooking Show started. They were an avid fan and very keen on cooking, having a modest following for a 3D cooking screen show that had made in the little free time that they had. It was amateurish but enthusiastic, and Ixel hoped that one day that they might do so full time. Soon it was in sight, and they eagerly forewent the usual after-work mealtime and into the sleeping pool where the largest screen in the house resided. They finally relaxed their gills with an audible click, because while being in the open air was possible, it was so uncomfortable. They turned on the screen pad and floated easily, scales turning from their gray to blue in the water. Every 10 standard galactic years, the gauntlet is thrown down to the entire galaxy. 4 categories, 4 winners, but many, many more losers. Does your species have what it takes to become the ultimate chef? Says the faceless announcer. Cheesy commercial music starts playing in the background. Axel watches as the camera slowly pans onto the massive kitchen area, clearly broken into 4 categories: herbivore, omnivore, carnivore, and mineralizer. They are already cooking up a storm. It is hard to see if any species, especially new ones, are standing out, and even though they are mostly alien to Axel, they can see the looks of the concentration on the face. And perhaps that's what first stands out to them. It is a smaller species they don't recognize, pink and tan with shaggy grey and brown fur on their head, forward-facing eyes, and strange designs on its arms, dressed in a sharp white top with the sleeves rolled up. Though Axel thought the lines might be decorative ink painted on for luck, this was common in warrior species. The significant part is the look of what Axel thinks is boredom, and yet it brandished its thin metal blades with a deadly speed and accuracy, barely looking as it made short work of the mountain of vegetables Axel had never seen before. Many rounds went by, and Axel continued to watch the bored one, which they now knew was known as a human, and that this was an older human that was considered the best chef in the whole species, according to someone named Mitch Allen, whoever that was. They rushed home every scorn day from work in order to see what would happen next. The human had decimated most of the competition. It used animal fats in a way that most had never seen before. And honestly, Axel just thought that every plate the human had brought forward looked like a piece of art. It had certainly impressed all of the omnivore judges, but it was now the final round. Axel was particularly excited for this, as the category was supposed to be representation of the best of your species' food cultures into one full meal. Before it had been just 1 or 2 items each time. But true skill, no matter what species, was always the ability to time when your dishes came out. The human looked more like a dancer than a chef, as it flitted from one side of its mini kitchen to the other. Still, with that look of what Axel now knew was an expression of boredom for the species. The timer was getting close to its end. Axel was sweating for the human's sake as it continued to flit between the different stations. It had finally plated up most everything that it was making and was now scooping something yellow, thick and creamy, like Axel's favorite wag pudding, into a shallow bowl and sprinkled something on top generously. The human pulled out a small white device, and suddenly Axel saw flames shooting everywhere, and it screamed in surprise. Axel could hear alarm sounds from the camera pod itself was tipping over, but they could still see that the human and its face still looked just as bored as it spat flames onto the food that it had spent so long cooking. Then the fire system cut in, and water started to spray from the top of every kitchen in the vast complex, and Axel finally saw the human with an expression, and it seemed to be annoyance at someone ruining the food that it had just set on fire. Axel shuddered and hoped to never meet one of the species. Cooks were generally the peaceful ones. They definitely didn't want to meet one of the warrior ones. Cut to snooty looking and very pissed off French chef when someone ruined his perfect creme brulee. End of story. And that, my friends, concludes this dose of science fiction fun. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you did, please don't forget to support the author from the link down below. But if you want to support this channel, there are links as well down below for you to help with. But the easiest way would be to share this video, and if you are so inclined, subscribe as well. I will see you all in the next episode, and I hope that you all have a fantastic time until then. Cheers.